The Pacific is now out for everyone on Battlefield 5, and what better way to kick off the launch of Iwo Jima and Pacific Storm than to take a closer look at the history behind the most iconic weapon of World War II, the M1 Garand. And yes, that is the official way of pronouncing this rifle according to Gun Jesus Ian McCollum. Hey everyone, what's going on? Christopher, the video game historian here, with another video on the history behind the weapons of Battlefield. This week I'm taking a look at the M1 Garand, the rifle that General George S. Patton claimed to be the greatest implement of battle ever devised. So let's take a jump into the Pacific Ocean with the real history of the M1 Garand. The M1 Garand rifle is an iconic weapon of not only World War II, but also of the American Armed Forces. It's chambered in .30-06 Springfield, fed from an 8-round end-block clip that sits inside the internal magazine well and weighs slightly over 9.5 pounds, with a total length of 43.5 inches. It's entirely semi-automatic that uses a rotating bolt and a gas-operated system for its action, that allows a rate of fire between 16 and 24 rounds per minute. Its effective range is out to 500 yards and has a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second. Now, about 5.4 million of these rifles were ever produced, and today they can be a bit hard to find in one's own local gun shop. But civilians can always sign up for the Civilian Marksmanship Program, where they can get their very own M1 Garand rifle at a reasonable price, though supplies are usually limited and there usually is a long waiting period. As for the history of this rifle, the M1's roots can be traced back to the turn of the century, when the US Army began taking a serious interest in semi-automatic rifles, with the plan of converting their entire force over to them. All throughout World War I, the Army tested and experimented with various semi-automatic rifles and conversion kits like the Peterson kit for the M1903s, but none were all that successful or reliable enough to adopt on a grand scale. After the war in 1919, the Army concluded that the round the M1903s were chambered in at the time, a 220 grain .30-03 round, was just too powerful of a round at the combat ranges they found themselves in. In 1926, they would adopt the less powerful round, the .30-06. Now that same year in 1919, one John C. Garand would enter employment at Springfield Armory as Chief Civilian Engineer and was given the task of designing a new rifle for use for the US Army. The Army Ordnance Department gave Springfield a list of requirements that the rifle had to meet. Whatever this new rifle may be, it had to be no more than 9 pounds, be adapted to shoulder firing, have a magazine that was fed from either clips or chargers, simple to manufacture and strong, be entirely semi-automatic, be designed to preclude premature unlocking of the rifle, to function without any special grease or oil being added, and to use the .30 caliber round. Quite the list, but Garand and Springfield got to work. His first design was the M1922 model rifle, first tested in 1924. This was chambered in .30-06 with a primer-operated breech, and after inconclusive results, Garand improved the design further with the M1924 model, which he chambered in both .30-06 and .276. Once again, this rifle was tested out in 1927 and 28, again with indifferent results. One positive outcome from the 1928 trial, however, was the fact that the infantry and cavalry were so impressed with the .276 variant that they dropped the .30-06 variant in its favor. After several improvements on the M1924 rifle, the .276 chambered rifle was tested again in the spring of 1931 against the other final contender, the T1 Peterson. A .30-06 variant was also to be tested, but a broken bolt meant it had to be withdrawn. After the trials, the .276 model of Garand's rifle was chosen to enter production for the Army in January of 1932. However, during this time, the .30-06 variant was retested. Once hearing about the new results from the tests, General Douglas MacArthur ordered production to be ceased on the .276 variants, with all resources and development being focused on improving the .30-06 variant. MacArthur was also not in favor of reducing calibers, and logistically would not make much sense to have a variety of calibers that needed to be resupplied throughout an entire army. In 1933, the rifle was officially designated as a U.S. rifle caliber .30 M1. The first production models of the M1 Garand rifles began on July 21st, 1937, however initial production issues delayed the delivery until September. The problem that production was running into was the changes in the gas system and the barrel of the new rifles. Once these issues were fixed, Springfield would be producing the rifles at a rate of 100 per day, and by 1941, Springfield was producing 600 per day, resolving many of the initial issues. The US Army was able to equip its entire force with the new M1 rifles by the end of 1941, and despite initial reservations of the rifles, the Marines would also end up converting over and adopting the rifles by the middle of the war. While the rifle was extremely reliable, there were some complaints about it from the soldiers who used it, being that it was too heavy, cumbersome, and limited mobility. Despite the complaints, the M1s continued to be the main service rifle of the US Army until 1957 with the introduction of the M14s. By 1965, the M1 Garands were finally retired from service. After the war was over, the US government gave surplus rifles to the Italians, Germans, and Japanese in aid in order to help them rebuild their militaries. And that's all I have on the M1 Garand rifles. What are your thoughts on this weapon? Do you enjoy it, or do you prefer the other semi-automatic rifles in the assault class? Is it overpowered, or does it need a buff? Let me know in the comments below what your opinions are, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media with Twitter and Facebook, and until next time, I'll see you all